I forgot about that song. It's good to hear it.
All right, here's what we got, right? Last week we discovered an empty tomb. But now what? Because you got to get the message out that somehow this is the watershed mark of history where everything has changed. So we got to get enough folks out there to ensure that the Great Commission could begin. How do we do it? It's important. I've said this before, say it again. Folks of that time did not expect a resurrection. This was a brand new concept. It wasn't in the pagan world. It wasn't in the Jewish world. The notion that one man was going to resurrect in the middle of history by himself was unknown. Therefore, you were talking a language that had no interpreter. This was brand new. The Jews themselves had two views of resurrection. The Pharisees believed that all of Israel would resurrect at the end of time. The Sadducees said there was no resurrection at all. That was the two views within Judaism. Those were the only two views within Judaism. There really was no competing theories. No one was running around going, there's going to be this one guy in the middle of history. That didn't happen. And neither side was really willing to budge on their beliefs. In other words, they were entrenched. This would be like going to tell a Pentecostal there's no such thing as tongues. This would be like telling a Baptist it's okay to dance. There's just certain things that you don't mess with, right? And these views of resurrection were there. They were entrenched. Now, you say, well, how did one had resurrection, one had no, how did they come up with that? Well, that was from the Old Testament. If you want to look up the word, it's S-H-E-O-L, Sheol. And that's what the Old Testament teaches is kind of like a gateway to heaven, a holding tank before heaven was open. The Old Testament mentions it 65 times. Psalms says it's the depth of the earth, along with Isaiah and Numbers. The afterlife was a place of darkness, according to Job, and it was a place of silence, but it was also a conscious existence, and that was in Isaiah and Ezekiel, Deuteronomy and Samuel. So if you did a search of Sheol, you'll find all this. While both the righteous and the unrighteous go to Sheol, everybody. The righteous are said to enter into peace, where the unrighteous go to the lowest part of Sheol. So it's certainly not the view of heaven that we currently hold. It was a little less enthusiastic, if you will. So the belief that what the Jews of the Old Testament would have considered themselves blessed was if they lived a long life, if they had a lot of property, and then they had a lot of children. This was a sign that God had blessed them. And that was really what they were looking forward to, not so much what was going to happen afterwards. Now, Daniel 12 speaks of, it says this, 12:2, it says, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt, one rising to everlasting life, and the other one to contempt and shame. There's the Pharisees' view of resurrection. One resurrection at the end of time, all of Israel. The Sadducees didn't interpret it that way, and they said, no, there's no resurrection at all, and the camps were there. So it's a kind of a muddled picture, if you will. Even during Paul's time, he took advantage one time of starting an argument so he could clear out of the place. He started an argument and said, well, I don't, some of you people say there's no resurrection. What do you think? And then they all got to fighting, and that kind of took the attention off of Paul, and he was able to make way for an escape. Now that's the same kind of thing. If you walk into, if you want to start an argument, just walk into a church and say, do you have to be baptized to be saved? And what's all this predestination stuff? Well, in 10 minutes you'll have bloodshed, right? Because I mean these are things we can't discuss. And so it was pretty much the same way. This view of resurrection was very muddled. Certainly nothing like the Christian view, which was totally, this is totally different. Both sides would have agreed, that ain't right. The Pharisees would have said no way. The Sadducees would have said no way. It was probably the only thing they could agree on. Now, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says this: if Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? This would be the Sadducees. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless. Understand what he just said. That he didn't quibble there. Our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. Christianity without the resurrection is a dog without a bone. It has nothing to stand on. So anybody that wants to spiritualize Jesus into a really happy hippie who kind of loved everybody and he did all these really sweet and nice things, are missing the boat. And that's one of the things that you could kind of call it pablum Christianity, if you will, where we spoon feed people this image of Christ that he's like, again, sort of a happy hippie, right? He just sort of hangs out with me. But we're going to see when we talk about the resurrections, there was a far different picture that was given there. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, so is our faith. More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God, for we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But if he didn't raise him, in fact, the dead are not raised, and if the dead are not raised, then Christ wasn't raised either. It's just that simple. And if Christ hasn't been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Those who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people to be pitied. So he's made this very strong case for there was a resurrection in the middle of history. One man, he's there. And because of that, it's changed everything. Your view of resurrection is wrong. Well, how did he base his argument? What evidence did he give to base his argument on that? Well, it was right before that. He said, what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance. What he received was probably from two primary sources. First of all, the road to Damascus, where he got himself a little bit of a tutorial. And the second one would be when he spent some time with Peter in Galatians. He said, I spent I had 15 days with Peter. And Peter probably, because this would have been, the time to go to Damascus would have been about 1 year, probably 5 years, somewhere in that range after the crucifixion, the resurrection. So in that period of time, enough had got stirred up that Paul, as Acts says, he was throwing murderous threats against the Christians. You gotta imagine that in today's world, that would be the person preaching jihad and preaching it very loudly and then having the power to do what he said. He went to the governor, he went to the ruler, he said, I need some papers. These were authorization papers that allowed him to yank Christians from their houses. And on the way to Damascus, he gets a little bit of a smack in the head, if you will. Saul, he wasn't even Paul yet. He changed his name to Paul because he went to the Gentiles. Why did he go to the Gentiles? Because he said this. He said, when he said, okay, God, I get it. I have been so wrong. But you can't, my goodness, if you send me to these people, speaking of the Jews, they all know what I've done. There's no, come on. And God said, that's not a problem. You're going to the Gentiles. You're not going to have to deal with your past in that regard. In other words, and there's something that can be said for all of us. Sometimes we're not going to go to the place. There's going to be a place where we can't go but there will be a place where God will send you. And that, I think, is really important. But he says this, what I received, I passed in the first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried. He was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. And then he starts. And then he appeared to Cephas. That would have been in Luke 24, after he just spoken to the men in Emmaus, somewhere around in there. And then to the 12. We're going to cover that. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers. You know, there's nothing in Scripture that says there was, in the Gospels, that said, by the way, he spoke to 500 people. For Paul to be able to say, after that he spoke to the 500, not give any details, that means the people pretty much, you can rest assured they pretty much knew something about this. He didn't have to give the details. He just said, y'all know that, the 500, right? And he said, oh, by the way, most of them are still alive. There's a few of them are checked out. So that tells you that this would have been fairly recent to the crucifixion, maybe 20 years or so. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters. Most are still living, some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and then least of all, he appeared to me as one abnormally born. James, there's no mention of specifically James being spoken to by Jesus after the resurrection. Again, that would have been something that would have been just. And to all the apostles, there were a couple of times, Luke 24 gives that, and John 20, both of those tell with some details about that. So we're talking about this event where Paul was about maybe 1 year. That would be right up to the crucifixion. Maybe 5 years, somewhere in there. That'd be a little bit further removed. But what do we know has happened? Christianity has exploded. How far has it exploded? Far enough that Paul and everyone else is trying to put the end to it. We've got to snuff this out before it gets started. Well, what we learned from COVID-19 is you can't stop a virus. You might slow it down, but you're not going to stop it. A virus is going to do what a virus does. And this was viral. You're not going to stop Christianity. Enough people were starting to be convinced, who convinced other people, that it had become viral. And it did it within a very short time after the crucifixion, which means a light bulb switch, which means the view of resurrection that everybody held changed immediately. 4,000 years of teaching that they had argued over, and all of a sudden it was like, boop, here comes this new teaching. No, there is a man that there's a resurrection. And then there's going to be the evidence. So Paul says the evidence for us is this. Here's all these people, Cephas and James and the apostles, and then he appeared to me. So the question is, what are some of the details after that? Well, first of all, before we get to that, we know Paul was a young man because Acts 7, it says he was a young man when all this happened. And if you don't want to read the entire Old Testament, read Acts 7. It's a cliff note of the Old Testament. Literally, it gives you a history of Israel as spoken by Stephen in about 500 words. And it's classic. I mean, it's great. Read it, familiarize yourself with it, because it is the history of Israel. We know this too. We know Stephen was willing to die for the belief that until recently, no one even considered. When the man was taken off the tree, that was that. He's dead. He ain't coming back. In fact, he was cursed by God, because if you die on a tree, it was evidence that you have been cursed by God, according to Deuteronomy. Well, that was the roots of the revolution. Somehow or another it started. Stephen was a representative of this revolution that was beginning. It wasn't going to stop, and he was willing to die for it. Acts tells us where the story where the candle was lit, really lit. There was a very few people up until that time, a small posse, if you will, of believers. But in Acts 2, they're all there from different parts of Jerusalem, or from Israel rather. And then there were also these outsiders, the Greeks, the Medes, the Persians, and so forth. They were all around in the market square, because this is the French Quarter. and people gathered to do business. And then they all started hearing their own languages, which was very strange. And you can tell from the language in the text in Acts, some of the people that were there were almost certainly people who were hollering, "We have no king but Caesar." Because he keeps saying you. Well, now, obviously, some of these people were visitors, tourists, businessmen, but some of them were only, less than 2 months removed from we saw that dude dead. And this needs to be understood because it's still true today. They had an absolute disgust for Jesus. It can't be overstated. They hated him. They hated him to the point that they were willing to do anything they could to get rid of him. We'll make up stories. We'll go to Pontius Pilate and we'll say that he did this and he did that, or we'll say that we make up stories about he blasphemed. They were willing to go to any length necessary to destroy the man. That was their goal. They were so disgusted by Jesus that they preferred a murderer be released in his place. Now, you have to understand this, because this was the mindset that the candle was lit in. This is David Duke standing in a Black Panther meeting, and everybody all of a sudden changes their view. That's a horrible example, but you get the picture of how extreme it is. I mean, this is unbelievable hate that immediately changed. That's what I'm trying to point out here. These people were suffering from JDS, Jesus Derangement Syndrome. The very name invoked hatred of the worst kind. But all the dialects were there, and they were hearing the same message. And the message was this, because Peter then tells it to the Jews. He says, "Fellow Israelites." So now he's speaking to the Jewish people. This is what all the other people had just heard in their own languages. "Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited to God, to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know." Oops. These were things that they had either seen, heard, verified. This was not in dispute. There wasn't like, well, they're not really things that were signs and miracles attested to by God. And that's not, it says you know these things. Now, here's what the rest of Acts says. They were cut to the quick, which means they realized, like Saul did, I'm going to kill Christians. I came back a believer. They were standing there going, we killed that man because we hate him. We were so wrong, we need to be baptized. About 3,000 of them. 180. Absolute 100% 180. They were dedicated haters of Christ, and then they went back to the group that loved Christ. They went like this. Now that's where the movement started, but before it got into this group where it really just went out of control viral, there was this very small group that didn't hate Jesus, they loved him. And they had been, for whatever reason they followed, they believed that he was something special. Now, that's a little bit, what does that mean? Because on the one hand, Peter says, who do you say I am? And Peter said, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of God, the Anointed One. Peter also says, I don't know the man. What did Peter believe? Because it's easy to say what you believe when your head's not on the chopping block. But when you get the cancer diagnosis, it's real now. It's a different deal. It's altogether different. When times were easy, Peter could proclaim Jesus as God and Messiah, the Son of God. That's who you are. Who do you say? That's who I say you are. When times got tough, Peter was like, oh, I'm not too sure. The people that were following him around sometimes did a lot of quibbling amongst themselves. I'm great, yeah, but I'm greater. Well, you might be greater, but I am even greater still. It got so bad that a mama went to him and said, can my boy sit at your right and your left hand? And she said, you don't know. Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking. And that's what you have to kind of understand, because this is what lit the candle. These people who were believing that there was going to be a resurrection of all of Israel, or there was going to be no resurrection of all, both of them would have decided that bloody, brutal, savage death of Jesus was final. That's it. There is not any more. Till Sunday. The first to see him was Mary Magdalene. John 20 describes it. She's going to the tomb early because she wants to finish the proper burial. She wants to show her respect. She wants the man to be properly interred. And there were certain things that had to be done in order for that to take place. And she was crushed. Her state of mind was absolutely defeated. She gets there and the tomb's empty. Now the first thing she says is, someone stole the body, which means she had no concept of what? Resurrection. She's not looking for that. The first thing she thinks is, thieves. They went and, good grief. So now it's not only the worst kind of depression, it's desperation. It's those two things together. She runs back to her crowd. She finds Peter and John. She says, he's not there. They run. They find the tomb empty. We talked about that last week. They go back to the disciples and go, there's the only thing in there is a couple of cloths. One of them's been folded neatly sitting in the corner. He's not there. Mary, though, Mary hangs around. She's still just, she's hanging around the tomb, and it says she's weeping, sobbing. The memory, you know that what she's thinking, I saw that man dead. I saw how many scars he had. I saw how much blood he gave. I saw him stick the spear in his side. She can't get this out of her head, right? I mean, this is PTSD to the worst. This is because it's the image that is burned in there that will never go away. You watch the man that you thought was all that die brutally. So there she is, and there's this angel. Now, she doesn't know it's an angel, but there's this angel. She says, the angel says, this is... The Bible is given to understatement. The angel says, why are you crying? Who are you looking for? Now that in itself tells you that what the angel is basically saying is, you better hang on to your hat, Hannah, because what's fixing to hit you is going to be more than a lightning bolt. But the angel didn't say, he's alive, go find him. The angel just said, find it for yourself. And she says, I'm looking for the body, and then she sees this person, and she figures, well, it's a gardener. The last thing she would think, it was who? Jesus. Because somebody stole that body. That's not him, obviously, but when you're desperate, you go talking to anybody. And she goes up to him, and she says, maybe he knows. Where did they take him? Just tell me where they took him, and I can finish the burial. That's what was on her mind. I've got to finish the burial. And Jesus says one word, Mary. And you recognize that voice, because you've heard that voice for a long time. Now, the first thing that I would do is go, I need to see what this is all about. Mary didn't run away. Mary ran too. And she saw at that time Jesus. She referred to him as rabbi, teacher. Oh, God, he's back. Teacher. And she did what any rational person would do who thought that the man was dead and he's not. She grabbed him. She hugged him. And he said, whoa, not yet. Not yet. It's not time yet. There'll be time, but not yet. So she goes back and tells the disciples. Now, Luke 24 and John 20 kind of both give us a good picture of this. The disciples in John 20 says they were locked in a room. They were hiding out. Luke doesn't give us that. It just says they were together. This was shortly after Emmaus, right? So these poor dudes are walking along. Jesus kind of comes up beside them, kind of has a little conversation with them. Then they go back and tell the disciples, he's alive. All right, so now we got Mary, and then we got these two guys. And then it also says he appeared to Peter. It's like, all right, we're starting to get verification. Multiple sources are coming together independently and are all telling the same crazy story. They're in this building locked, and they're going, what do you make of this? And then Jesus is amongst them. And you go, well, how did he get there? Well, if you can open a tomb, you can pick a lock. And so he walks in and stands amongst them. Now, how is that for a visual? And once again, to picture the energy in the room. Think about what they're going to kill us. That's one of the things they're saying. What are these people talking? I don't know. But they're going to kill us. That's probably still the most prominent thing in their mind because they were scared. And then this guy shows up and he says, peace be with you. Wow. That is almost like a colloquial, Gomer says, hey, what y'all doing? What's up? What's all the fuss? No big announcement. Just peace be with you. If you would have had a blood pressure monitor at this time, it would have been interesting, to say the least. If you would have had a heart rate, you know, these little things that, hey, do you know if you're going to have a heart attack today? Well, you put your finger right there. I mean, it was probably like 200 beats a minute and rising, right? Adrenaline, the whole 9 yards. And then he did something that's peace be with you. And they probably all were about to run like rats. And he said, no, check, look. Remember? He showed them the wounds. That's what it says. It says showed them the wounds. Then they understood, and Luke goes on to explain in pretty much detail how all this was supposed to take place. John just skips that, probably because John is written later and everybody already knew the details and there wasn't any reason to rehash them again. Didn't you know I had to suffer and die? All that business I told you about? No, you didn't. No, you didn't, because you wouldn't be sitting in here like rats on a sinking ship right now if you would have. But now you know, and it says they understood, they believed. Jackpot. Whatever they were thinking, whatever their thinking was about doom and gloom and resurrection and hopelessness, it all changed instantly because they had no clue that Jesus was going to resurrect either. He may have told them multiple times. He did, but it tells in Luke, I believe it's 17, it says that he says, look, this is what's going to happen. The Son of Man's going to Jerusalem. He's going to be hit on. He's going to be spit on. He's going to be beat on. He's going to be crucified. And 3 days later, he's going to rise again. Any questions? Yes. What are you talking about? Because it says the disciples understood none of that. They didn't understand. And then you get this. It says that their future is going to be, it says, I'm going to send you out just as the Father sent me. Mark that down. That's important. I'm going to send you out just as the Father sent me. Now, what do you think they understood that to mean? Oh boy, I'm going to get a Boston Whaler 40-footer with 300 horsepower Mercuries and maybe a private jet. And what else? What else can you think of? I need a house. I can't live in anything less than 6,000 square feet. I mean, really, and the bathroom's got to be. You get my point? When he says you're being sent out the way I was sent out, what was he sent out to do? Die. You're going to be sent out by me, just as my Father sent me out. Well, now, that's not a happy message, but they were overjoyed by the message. Because what they were being told was, whatever happens to you, this is what you're going to look like after it's over. And Thomas wasn't there that day. And he walks in, he goes, what's up, fellas? We saw him. You saw who? We saw Jesus. You're nuts. No, we saw Jesus. I'm telling you, you're nuts. Thomas said, I need proof. And everybody says, oh, doubting Thomas. Read the scripture. What did Jesus give the ones who were there without even being asked? Check the wounds. Thomas just did what the natural, normal person would say. That's going to be an indicator, because if he's standing there with these, I get it, because you're not going to fake that. I know what I know. And it says Thomas was quick to challenge him. Then he demanded proof, and the same proof was given to him. Thomas knows there's only one absolute confirmer of this story. Thomas knows that whatever view of resurrection had been held is destroyed. There's a new vision, and this one is the right vision. No fake here. It says he believed. Now, he believed as a result of what? He believed because of evidence. Conclusion. Just like we looked at the shroud last week. Is it the image of Jesus? We'll just call it the man on the cloth. But the man on the cloth has an anatomically correct depiction of a crucifixion. The man on the cloth has blood stain, which is the same as a blood stain on the siderium. The man on the cloth has deposits of dirt that match at the nose from the cloth. We could keep going. We went through all that. The man on the cloth has scourge marks which match what a Roman whip would have done. Is that evidence? You decide. I will say this, if it's proven to be a fraud, that would do nothing to destroy my faith. Until it's proven to be a fraud, it is something that I hold as an ace in my pocket. It is reassuring. It is my Thomas moment. You want proof? Here, dude. Tell me how they managed to put bones in my negative image. I'll wait, because they haven't come up with it yet. That's your Thomas moment. We all need the Thomas moment. If you just believe simply with your heart, that can be deconstructed so quickly, because your heart always changes. If you just believe with your head, you're a fish, a cold fish. You sit around and want to argue about how many fairies can dance on the head of a pin, and meanwhile people are going to hell. It's the heart and the head that come together to make a change. Their change was taking place when they saw the risen Christ. And their view of resurrection was changed forever. Because Christianity proclaimed what? Christ lived, Christ died, Christ was resurrected. That was 2,000 years ago. What does Christianity proclaim today? Christ lived, Christ died, Christ was resurrected. That belief has never changed. Well, we get in arguments about baptism and tongues and predestination. We get in arguments about everything, but we don't get in arguments about that. If we do, we can't call ourselves Christians. Because Paul said that. If there is no resurrection, there is no faith. And then there was the brave one. Every group's got a brave one. The guy that wants to step out in the front and show that he's all of that. Ready to take it on. Talk big. What I'm going to do. If that guy, I was just about to, ... I was just, if he'd have just given me, I was about up to my eyeballs and blah, blah, blah. That kind of talk, right? I was going to let him have it. They also, those kind of presumptuous people also tend to, the ones that are at the front, the ones that talk big, they tend to be presumptuous. I'll chop this guy's head off that's trying to arrest Jesus. That'll get his attention. That'll impress him. That guy was part of the ones who, when they started arguing about who's the greatest, I'm sure he was sitting on the side, just kind of like, y'all get through with your argument and then turn and ask me who's the greatest. Really? I mean, is it that hard to figure out? Right? And like I said, who do you say I am? Oh, you're the Messiah, Christ. Peter knew that was the answer, but that was when times were easy. Because now the one that he said was the Son of God was being systematically executed, not by chance. This was going by the book. First you'll be flogged. Then you'll carry your cross, the top part of it, tibulum, I believe they call it. You'll carry that. You'll be so tired, so exhausted, so overcome by shock that you'll fall. But you won't be able to break your fall because your hands are tied, so you'll just collapse. Which means wherever you collapse, it's going to be on your knees, it's going to be on your elbows and your face. Which, by the way, the shroud has deposits of dust on all three areas. And somebody's going to have to help you pick yourself up because you can't do it. Even if you could, you're under normal circumstances, you've been beat to death. You're going to die just from the beating. It'll take a while, but you're going to die. That's what was systematically waiting for Jesus. So now, here's your chance, fish or cut bait. Because once again, Jesus is asking, although he's asking in a different way altogether, who do you say I am? And Peter says, I never knew the man. You were there. I never knew the man. I wasn't there that night. You didn't see me at the trial. And finally, he tells him with a curse, I can't say it any clearer. I never knew the man. And there's a cautionary tale here. Because in one way, Peter did not know the man. He thought he knew the man. Maybe more importantly, Peter thought he knew himself. But when it came time to identify, who do you say I am? Well, it was easy when it was standing there with nobody fixing to skin you alive. But when it came time to do it, he punted. Now, through history, we've seen evidence of this all the time. Who do you say I am? They're called martyrs. And there's thousands of them, maybe more. when given the opportunity to fish or cut bait, they fish. And they say, you do what you will. Because just like those apostles in that room, I know what Jesus went through, but I know what he is. He is not dead. So what are you going to do to me, big boy? That removes that reality. That's what motivated these people. Now, Peter was obviously conflicted on Sunday. Imagine that. He says that he appeared to Peter. We don't know what he said there, but he didn't. We know what he said a little bit after that. Peter knew he abandoned Jesus because he saw him as dead man walking. Bad baggage, I got to cut bait. But he's back. Now, you have to understand, because one of the things that happens, Saul was hurling murderous threats. He came back a believer. Peter said, not me. No. But his change was absolute 180 degrees. This is the testimony to what it means to understand, to follow the evidence and make the conclusion that it happened. Well, when he showed back up in the room, I'm sure Peter was going, well, he didn't call me out. He didn't dog me. Maybe he forgot. Man, it was a pretty stressful time. Maybe he's just going to let that slide, And in 21 John, it says that they went fishing. There was still the regular things to do. You had to eat. He might be resurrected, but we got to eat. Let's go fishing. They fished at night. They probably didn't have any headlamps to stir the fish up and get them to the top. They're just chunking nets and chunking nets and chunking nets and chunking nets. Till it's dawn, they chunk nets. They weren't fishing, they were throwing. Because they're not catching anything. And then, if you've ever been fishing and you're on the lake and it's just kind of foggy, kind of stuff, the haze and all that, there's this dude up on the bank and he says, what he always asks fishermen, catch anything? Now, can you imagine what all the options that went through their head that they were, it's like, who is this arrogant dude sitting on the bank? Probably could see that they probably could definitely hear them. They were probably like, we've been out here all stinking night. No. Throw it on the right side. Throw it. Uh-oh. Run to the left. Hurry, because the boat's going to capsize. Because of the load that we have just tagged on. And then John, being the smart dude that he was, says, "My gosh, Jesus." Now he knew that he was alive, but they didn't know that was him but obviously when they can tell you throw the net and it's completely full, that ain't chance. Now Peter does his Forrest Gump imitation and takes off to see Lieutenant Dan. It's only 100 yards and he is swimming. And when they get there, a meal is already cooked. Fish and bread. Think that brought a couple of memories back? There's 5,000 about to show up here right now. This man has a habit of fish and bread, being at the right place at the right time. So there was this, once again, the group is hovering around a meal. The last time that they ate with Jesus, he said, "This is my body. This is my blood." And now he's saying, have some fish. And in the middle of all that, they're kind of just getting their bearings again. They've been told, you're going to follow me. You're going to be sent by me just like my Father was sent. He tells Peter, come here. And he asked him 3 times, not by mistake. It's obviously 3 times because he denied him 3 times. Do you love me? Yeah. You got to feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yeah. You got to feed my sheep. Do you really love me? You know I love you. And the sarcastic could have been, well, then why didn't you say so when you had the first chance? But that's not the way how Jesus operates. So if you're sitting there dealing with some kind of thing in your head about how can he forgive me of this? Well, you probably, in the scheme of things, it probably doesn't bump right up against Peter going, I didn't know that. I mean, if anybody would have a right to be mad, you know, where somebody says, I can't forgive him, that probably would have been close to it. But he tells him this, he says, as a young man, you went where you wanted to go, but as an old man, you're going to go to a place you don't want to go. And you need to be ready. Now, he pretty much told Peter, if you follow me, that's what you got waiting for you. This is what eyewitness events caused. It caused the guy who said, I never knew the man cursing, to say, you're going to have to crucify me upside down because I can't be killed the way my Savior was killed. It causes a man who says, I never knew the man, in Acts chapter 2 to say, this man you crucified is both Messiah, that would be to the Jews, the anointed one, and Lord. He was God. He was speaking to everyone. He is saying he's more than Messiah. We didn't have the whole picture. We wanted a Messiah. We didn't realize we were getting God. I mean, this was like, you know, this is the bonus round, guys. And we killed him. But he's back. And the people said, man, we were cut. What do we do? What do we do? Obviously, there had been enough of an explosion that they were beginning to understand. Well, there really has been a resurrection. So somehow, in this historical context of Jesus haters, Jesus derangement syndrome, these people were flipped and became followers. And it happened rapidly. 3,000 in one day. 3,000. And the immediate group, the immediate small group, there's nothing in history that's, it's an argument of silence, but it's a powerful argument. There's nothing in history to say they ever turned their back. In fact, legend says most of them were martyred. We know that Peter was martyred. We know that James was martyred. And we know that Paul was martyred. We know that. Some of the others, church history, maybe, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But we know those 3. I would tend to say the church history is more accurate than inaccurate. But that's just me. Paul could have easily said, I got it all wrong. But he said, no, you're gonna have to kill me. Peter, you have to kill me in the persecution, Nero. And James, the brother of Jesus, was thrown off the temple, according to Josephus. And accounts kind of vary a little bit, but one of the accounts by another historian says that he was still alive after falling off the top of the temple. Excuse me, being chunked off the top of the temple. And so one guy whose job it was to beat the carpets out just took his club and bashed his brains in. Stephen was stoned. They wouldn't shut up. And they all understood the risk, because there was this other big dragon waiting for them called Rome. And Rome was persecuting. Rome was good at persecuting. In the catacombs of Rome, they've got the bones upon bones upon bones, and martyrs led out into the Colosseum. But a strange thing was happening. Before they lead them out, they were singing psalms and prayers and songs. You see, because I know what you're about to do to me is going to be exactly what was done to Jesus. You're going to kill me, and that you think is that. But there's more to the story. There's something that waits on the other side of death. That's why I say the Eastern Orthodox Church tends to get it a little more in focus, I guess. Death is not final. And the way we know death is not final is because Jesus said, check these out. And he told that to his closest people. So, the message of Christ is still the message of today. I'm sending you out just as my Father sent me out. And that may end up in you going to a place you don't want to go, but you are prepared. You're ready because you know the reason why you're going outweighs the consequences that will take place. Or, as Paul said, to live is Christ. To die is gain. The resurrection changed everything. It changed Paul, changed Stephen, changed the disciples, changed 3,000 people, changed the world. Now the world is kind of blasé about it. There's some people just kind of, that's a nice fairy tale. Well, not so fast. So as we move beyond Easter, may we always remember that it's Easter that lit the candle. And the candle still burns. So be in prayer for our church. There are other people that need to hear this message.
Yes.
And I think we have something to offer. So be in prayer for our world. Be in prayer for the Catholic Church, because they're about to pick a pope. And it may be that they're about to pick a pope that speaks a lot closer to the truth than where they have been historically. And that's a big changer, because one of the fastest growing religions in the world today is the Catholic Church, particularly in places like Africa. And we need to celebrate that, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the message stays pure. Christ lived, Christ died, Christ rose again. Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for your attention to detail, speaking to people after you rose. Not a big deal, not a huge celebration, not some kind of ticker tape parade, but just finding your closest people and say, check out the wounds. And then reminding those people that they were taking on the mission that you had started. And that mission ultimately will leave all of his believers in conquest of death. That's where the faith came in. If it happened for Jesus, it can happen for me. And we celebrate that. And we ask that in the days to come, we be given opportunities to advance this message to where others